I have nothing personally against President Rajapaksa. If he just cleared the wax that is blocking his ears and listened, we could have all supported him. We could have all stood with him. I'm not per se against the executive presidency. However, I am against sort of arbitrary powers. The people of this country blindly voted for this government at every single election because of the war. We can't keep singing tunes about the war and saying the war took place, the war happened, the war is this, the war is that. We must move on. Development is not just about building roads. How the money comes in, how the money goes out, what it is spent for, nobody really has a real clue about, and that is very dangerous. I believe that we should strengthen the institutions that protect democracy and, of course, civil society. Currently, my focus is not which party I'm going to be in or how I'm going to contest the next election. I'm more interested in this country and a solution for this country. And I think Maithripala Sirisena is a solution for this country. Yes, my great-grandfather was the founder of the United National Party. However, as a youth activist, I was in the UNP, but I contested first from the SLFP because at that point I had a small difference with the United National Party, which hopefully is resolved now. It was more with regards to the attitude of the war, which I thought then SLFP had a better attitude, and also some of the people that I had to work with immediately in the UNP, particularly in the Polonnaruwa district, were people that I found impossible to work with. And I'm extremely happy to note that they are now in President Rajapaksa's government in the SLFP. So now working with the UNP will not be too much of a problem in the future, I think. It was not President Rajapaksa I supported, it was President Chandrika Kumaratunga at the beginning. And I continued to stay on under the Rajapaksa presidency when he took over after her. No, I didn't say I didn't dislike his policies. What I very clearly said was I preferred the stance taken by the SLFP with regards to the war, and that I disliked working with certain members of the UNP who were UNPers then, but have since mercifully crossed from the UNP to President Rajapaksa's camp. Yes, certainly. The war was resolved because of the people that President Rajapaksa put in place. And those two people mainly were Gotabaya Rajapaksa's brother and Sarath Fonseca. However, after the war ended, credit wasn't given to those two people enough. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, I think, got some credit, and I don't think the president grudged that. However, he definitely grudged the credit that was given to General Sarath Fonseca. The main problem the country was faced with at the time was the war. The better solution, I thought, to the war was being espoused by the SLFP that I joined. However, after the war has concluded, we can't keep singing tunes about the war and saying the war took place, the war happened, the war is this, the war is that. We must move on. Winston Churchill, for God's sake, won World War II, but he lost the subsequent election. However, at this time, seeing the immediate needs of the country post-war, A, reconciliation, B, good governance, C, abolishing the constitution that has been promised to be abolished in Mahinda Chintana 1 and 2 not happening. I think then you really have to take a stance on and the blatant corruption. I think you have to take a stance on all these things. You can't just close your eyes and say, the war was fought, the war was fought. The war was fought, and that is why the people of this country blindly voted for this government at every single election because of the war. Subsequently, I mean, every single provincial councils, local governments, general elections, they just voted for this government, presidential election. But you can't ride on that forever. I mean, T.S. Senanayake brought independence from the British Empire in 1948. People didn't vote for the UNP continuously for the next 30, 40 years because of that. So times change, and when there are more important issues, pressing issues of the time, those issues have to be addressed. The term for Mahinda Rajapaksa, President Mahinda Rajapaksa, is 6 years. He has 2 more years to go, and one should give him that period of time to fulfill his promises. Now, when he called for an early election, some of us actually told him, do not go for an early election, instead fulfill the promises that you've given the people. So when he doesn't do that and he goes for an election, it is very clear that he has no real intention of keeping any of his promises, but rather that he is more concerned about electoral victories for just staying in power and perpetuating whatever he wants to perpetuate. I did a decision that I regret tremendously. The context. Again, the war was just won at that time. We were young MPs that had just come into Parliament. I think we were 1 year, we were very, very new in Parliament. We were very fresh in Parliament. And I was given, I don't know what the other young MPs were given, what beliefs they held, but I believed it didn't matter if we abolished term limits because the constitution will be changed. So actually, if the constitution is changed, I am not against unlimited term limits, but I am absolutely against the dictatorial powers being held under the name of the presidency, the executive. I'm not per se against the executive presidency. However, I am against sort of arbitrary powers which sort of allow a president to dissolve parliament at any time when he just thinks it's right to dissolve or when it's politically expedient for him to dissolve. For him to be able to appoint people to the judiciary, the Supreme Court, people who have maybe no training in law even if he wants to, because there is no specification that he must appoint a person of such a legal background into the Supreme Court. It hasn't been done so far, but a president can do that. To be able to make high appointments into the police, for example. So you compromise the independence of this country, the independence of institutions that should be independent, truly independent. So when you compromise institutions like that, then what hope is there for democracy? What hope is there for freedom of the press? What hope is there for freedom of the individual? There's a history to it. I first proposed a constitution to the Parliamentary Select Committee. Now, when I realized that after submitting this proposed constitution, that the government had no real intention of going through any recommendation made to the Select Committee, and the Select Committee was an absolute farce, then I decided that I was going to take one provision of that constitution, which was a provision which basically said that the cabinet should be constitutionally defined and constitutionally limited. Now, I took that provision out and I presented that as a private member's bill. Now, when I did that, I knew if the government was against it, there was no realistic chance of passing it in Parliament. So, and of course, when I brought it, of course, the government fell down on me like a ton of bricks and didn't want me to proceed with it. So, what I did was I didn't withdraw it. I asked for a postponement where I would be able to submit it on a later date. But what I really wanted to do was to highlight or alert the situation where constitutional reform was needed. And I'm glad to say after I did that, there was a huge national-wide debate which started on constitutional reform. And I must say that my call for constitutional reform was not one that started after everyone else started talking about constitution. It was so many years before that. If you would go through the constitution I submitted to the Parliamentary Select Committee, It was well before anyone else had started talking about constitutional reform. Today, the main opposition line against President Rajapaksa, at the main opposition candidate, the common candidate's call, is also constitutional reform. If President Rajapaksa only listened, I mean, if he just cleared the wax that is blocking his ears and listened, we could have all supported him, could have all stood with him. It was a group of young professionals which I led. I was the only politically affiliated person in that group. Everyone else was lecturers, doctors, professors, people like that. So it was a panel of people who had a vision for this country. Firstly, I would like to say that I have nothing personally against President Rajapaksa. But Maithripala Sirisena also is a man I have known for a long time. I have worked with him for a long time when I was in Polonnaruwa district. I joined the SLFP with Maithripala Sirisena, in the sense he was the person who welcomed me into the SLFP, and he was the person who was with Chandrika Bandanayak Kumartunga and Maithripala Sirisena were together when I actually joined. So he was one of my first and initial contact points. Beyond that, we have worked closely, we have known each other quite well, and I think he's a man who's honest. I believe he has integrity, and he doesn't have a brother called Basil. I do believe it, yes, I do believe it. Of course, this trend has to change, in the sense Sri Lanka has, from a tradition of being fairly democratic, since the creation of the executive presidency, centered more and more on an individual, or in this case in a group of individuals, just totally absorbing the law and taking it into their own hands, from it being spread throughout the democratic institutions. Like, for instance, the courts should be independent, the police should be independent, the elections commissioner's office should be free of interference. So I believe that we should strengthen the institutions that protect democracy, and of course civil society. The journalists should have, and the newspapers should have a voice which is free of intimidation and government interference and control. I think if we have all those set in place, I think we will be a much better society, and I think politicians will have to pull up their socks and behave in a far more a manner in which is more acceptable to the people of this country. Yes, to this extent. When was corruption there? To this extent, I'm saying. Corruption may have always been there. I mean, actually, you can't tolerate corruption at all, but you can try to overlook corruption if it's in a very minor form. But when it is to an extent where even the decisions of ministries are taken by a few, not by the minister, but by a few family members who just decide, we are doing this, we are doing that, we are building such a highway, we are building such a port, we are building I mean, those things are all not taken by the minister or the ministry. So they are taken by a few other people. And how the money comes in, how the money goes out, what it is spent for, nobody really has a real clue about, and that is very dangerous, because Parliament needs to know. And not only Parliament, the people ought to know. The people have a right to know what is being done with their money. This is their money. Certainly, after the war has concluded, there has been visible development in the form of highways coming up and so on. However, can you really say that the average person's quality of life has improved? Can you say that the ordinary person is not finding it hard to fight the cost of living? Can you say that unemployment has significantly reduced in this country? Can you say all that? I mean, development is not just about building roads. We have won a war, but have we won the peace? Have we won the hearts and minds of the people in the north and the east? Do they feel as if they're part of this country, or do the people in the north and east feel as if they're a subjugated people? These are important as well. How the perception, the minds, the mindset, the ideas, the aspirations, all those things are also very, very important when you talk about development. Not as yet, no. My first course of action will be to ensure Maithripala Sirisena presidency. At this point of time, I get on very well with Maithripala Sirisena, with Ranil Wickremesinghe, with Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga, with the team that Maithripala has. So I think we will be able to jointly decide what my future is. At the moment, we'll be working with both the UNP and the SLFP, Maithripala's SLFP. I think I always have continued in the legacy of this family. In the sense, I think the legacy my ancestors in the form of DS and Dudley Senanayake left this country was to act honorably and decently. I think that is what comes out. I think when you speak of Dudley Senanayake, the first thing you think of before you think of him as a Prime Minister was a decent human being, whatever other disagreements you might have of them. I mean, Dudley Senanayake was a man who was not able to stomach the fact that two people died or one person died or something, that hartal of when he was Prime Minister, and he resigned from the office of Prime Ministership because he couldn't take the shock of that. I mean, you need values like that in this country. So I think their legacy is that, and I think I have always acted honorably. I've always acted decently. Sometimes I have taken very bold and strong decisions, like going to the SLFP at that time was a strong decision. Being the first person to walk out of the SLFP and join the common opposition was also a strong decision. But I think it reflects integrity that my parents have brought me up to uphold. If I am suited for any such position, I think that will come naturally and eventually. I don't aspire to cut anyone to get anywhere. If I am so suited, and if the people of this country think I am so suited, I think that will happen anyway. One must never cut another person or be envious of another person in order to try to climb up the ladder. If we are suited and the people think we are suited, I think that climb will happen. If not, we will stay where we are. Whether we climb up the ladder or do not climb up the ladder, wherever I am, if I am in a position where the people have elected me and entrusted a responsibility to me, I will try my hardest to uphold the expectations of me.
"50 years of strength, trust and stability, offering high security and the best return for your investments. Licensed by the Monetary Board of Sri Lanka and serving you with 5 decades of trusted excellence. Mercantile Investments and Finance PLC, service that extends beyond. Call 0112 348 348.